I told the president when he asked me about being the Secretary of Education, I said, I don't come from the world of education. And he said, I need a leader and an executive, and that's the kind of experience you have. So I said, yes, sir, let's go.
I think that it's incredible to have somebody as transparent as you in the Department of Education who is willing to really give us the details.
It's really interesting when you're given a job and told that you will be successful when you fire yourself.
Yes. Dismantling the Department of Education. What does that actually mean?
The Department of Education was established in 1980. Every year, as scores and performance goes down. We're clearly not doing something right. And if we want to be the number one country in the world, and we are in so many ways, we have to raise this bar. Our children have to be better educated.
Madam Secretary, thank you for your generosity sitting with us, parents. We have a lot of questions for you, and we know that you're doing some very big things. And I think that it's incredible to have somebody as transparent as you in the Department of Education who is willing to really give us the details on the plan. And so thank you again for sitting with us and for everything that you've been enduring over the last few months since you took on this incredible position.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. And, it's really interesting when you're given a job and told that you will be successful when you fire yourself.
Yes.
So it's a whole different challenge, to at the same time you're working to wind something down, you have to make sure that you are listening and learning so that you can help distribute best practices to the states as they take back full responsibility for education. So I'm trying to learn as much as I can. I'm traveling. I'm visiting charter schools. I'm visiting different kinds of schools, higher ed schools as well, to make sure that we're looking at all of the different kinds of curricula that can be established. And it's incredibly, no pun intended, educational.
Yes. Well, I think many people have so many questions, as do I, even beyond the general headline of dismantling the Department of Education. What does that actually mean? Where does the money actually go? And really, I think to even before we go into those details, I'd love to just get a better sense of you. You came from the small business world. That's what you did with the president in the previous administration. Yes. And now you're running the Department of Education. And so some of the criticism is surrounding around this concept of how could Linda McMahon, who is a business owner, become the head of the Department of Education if you're not an educator? Well, I'm curious, what is your response to that?
Well, I told the president when he asked me about being the Secretary of Education, I said, I don't come from the world of education. I said, however, I did get my certificate to teach. I wanted to be a teacher, so I majored in French. I got my certificate to teach in college. And I have also served for 16 years on the Board of Education of Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. And then I served on the State Department of Education. So I've had some education background. I'm not totally new to the world of education. But when I talked to the president about it, he said, look, here's what I need. He said, I don't need someone from the world of education. He said, I need a business executive and a leader who's going to look at this department and know how to dismantle it, if you will. Take the bureaucracy out of it. Make sure that all the parts that are left are the ones that are incredibly efficient, that they are moving to the states, that the curriculum that we need, best practices, tools that the states need, that they then can be made aware of. And he said, so I need a leader and an executive, he said, and that's the kind of experience you have. So I said, yes, sir, let's go.
Is it an interesting, because now that you describe your background in education, I'm thinking about the 4,400 employees that used to work in the Department of Education, where the vast majority of them were not educators. They were actually bureaucrats. But those are the ones who are complaining about your background in education, where, in fact, you probably have more background in education than most of the people who were let go.
Well, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I do enjoy the people that I'm working with. And I am enjoying doing things like this today, that I get to get out and not only talk about what we're doing, but listen to what other people's thoughts and ideas are. So I find that to be challenging and enlightening, fun. So I'm enjoying all the aspects of it. But also there's a great deal of hard work, and we put in a lot of hours. I have a very incredible staff, who works really, I think, many longer hours than I do to help prepare me for what's going on, to inform me, and to help us as we're winding down.
Oh, let's start with the macro question. Why do you think it's a good idea to dismantle the Department of Education?
Well, Marissa, think about this. The Department of Education was established in 1980. Since then, we have spent over $3 trillion to educate our children and watched every year as scores and performance goes down. We're clearly not doing something right. We have more administrators than we do students. The programs that have been put in place, I think many times with the best of intentions, like No Child Left Behind, like Race to the Top, like core curriculum. So I think that with the best of intentions, a lot of those programs have been put in place, but they're managed from Washington, D.C. And that's not where it needs to be. The president believes, as do I, that the best education is that's closest to the student. Who better to monitor the students than parents, teachers, and administrators that are on the scene to know what the students in their area needs. And so that's why the president certainly believes we need to take the bureaucracy out. But let's make sure that the funding's continuing to flow that is supporting the programs like Title I and like IDEA, which is for our handicapped and disabled students. And so, that's my goal. That's what we're looking to do.
So if the federal Department of Education is still effectively, well, it will no longer be, right, when you're done with your goal, how does the federal government disseminate these funds? Does it go through the Treasury directly into the states, and then the states make these decisions? Are Americans going to save some money? Last year, as Americans, I looked it up. I believe we spent over $268 billion through the Department of Education. Are Americans still going to spend $268 billion in education, and now it's going to go through the states? Or is some of that going to be cut down as well?
First of all the operational side we can wind down. But when we get to the policy side, Congress is going to have to vote to close the Department of Education. Now, I think if that vote were taken today, we probably wouldn't get the votes to close the Department of Education. So I think I have to prove, and working with Congress and being transparent with them with what we are trying to do, to let them know that the best interest of students will be served in doing this a different way. Now, to your specific question, some funds may still flow through another agency. For instance, and none of this has been decided, but let's say, for instance, the IDEA funds used to flow through what was then the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which is now HHS. So some of those funds may flow through there. But of that number that you quoted, $260-some billion, almost half of that was in student loans. So student loans, clearly, I don't think have any place in the Department of Education. So I'm working with Treasury. I've also talked with Department of Labor, some with the Small Business Administration, as we look to how can student loans best be handled? Are they better back in the private sector? But we have to work through that, and we'll get there on that. So how much will taxpayers save? I think they're going to save billions of dollars when we get worked through all of this. And at the same time, education will be better because it'll be handled at the state level. I think you'll see the scores start to go up. Our NAEP scores, which is our kind of national report card, which were abysmal again this year. We didn't see much improvement. There are a few bright spots in the country, but that's the litmus test, I think, for education, because it's comparing apples to apples everywhere, and that lets us know that we're not doing well when 70% of eighth graders can't read proficiently.
Well, who would run the national report card if the Department of Education is no longer? Would that go through some federal department that is overseeing the states if they're receiving taxpayer dollars?
Well, I don't think there will be one federal department overseeing states. The money would flow, be appropriated by Congress and flow in many instances directly into the states, whether it's in a block grant to governors and they look and say, well, this is the amount of money I have, but this money should go here. This money should go here. Right now, it's directed more by the federal government, and there are more strings attached to it. But that would not be the case. But in terms of the NAEP research, The testing itself, it could go to another research agency. It could be in the private sector. It doesn't have to be a government-run test, but it could be in the private sector, which I think would be cheaper, quite frankly.
Well, and probably better as well. We'd probably use all kinds of new technologies if we allowed the private sector to enter into education. I mean, education has been one of the most backwards departments and sectors of our country because it's been held hostage by elites, right? And so I've actually spoken to a bunch of business groups who have been coming up with all kinds of ideas of how they can bring education to the public, but they know that there's so much bureaucracy, there's so much red tape, and you can't pierce through the bureaucracy. So the innovators don't want to even step into the world of education because there's no incentive. They know that somebody is going to take them down. And so does the dismantling of the Department of Education mean that some of us education innovators can finally enter the market and actually produce new ways to educate Americans?
New programming, absolutely. And I think you're involved in a lot of it yourself. But I think one of the things we're seeing in the development of technology is through AI. Not only are students learning more about AI in school, which I think they should, but also I've now seen, independent tutoring with AI within a classroom. Where a teacher would have, let's say she has 20 or he has 20 students in the classroom, 20 screens. And watch each one of those students as they're progressing on a subject and sees one student not doing well, can institute the AI private tutor just to work with that student in that classroom. And that student is, catches up more quickly because there's one-on-one tutoring. Those kind of programs can happen at home as well. But those are being innovated by the private sector.
So aside from the private sector, because at the end of the day, if we're still paying a lot of taxes and we are still paying into the state, many of us are still trapped in this situation where if the state is receiving money from the federal government, then now we're at the mercy of the state and their education elites. So I know that you have used the Department of Education to hold some of the educational elites accountable for the egregious mistakes that they have been. I don't know if the word is mistakes. It's the violations that they've been doing against Americans. If the federal Department of Education doesn't exist, who is going to hold the states accountable for what they're doing in the world of education?
Well, Congress in its appropriations, would take a look at that and say, okay, this is the amount of money. And then states have to be competitive. And there's some states that are going to do better than other states. I mean, that's happening right now. There are many governors and other legislators within the states or other educators within the states are just simply doing a better job. They are looking at best practices. In the recent NAEP scores, the state of Louisiana, was one of the bright spots.
Yeah.
They had better improvement than any other state, in the country. And then we've seen the miracle in Mississippi with the reading scores that came up from next to last or second from last up to number 21. Now everyone would say, well, maybe that's not great, but that's a huge jump, a huge improvement. So there are those programs. And in Tennessee, we've seen some incredible improvements. So those states that are going to be innovative, and they're doing it with less money, by the way, they're branching out into more school choice, which the president is certainly a tremendous advocate and supporter of school choice. He really doesn't want to see any child trapped in a failing school and really does believe that parents should have the ability to choose where their child goes to school.
You brought up Louisiana. It is pretty amazing because Dr. Cade Brumley is probably one of the most attacked superintendents of education in America, mostly by the teachers' unions. And, he is really helping Louisiana so much. And I do think the parents are recognizing it. But you mentioned the Department of Education and the strings that were attached to the funding that the states were receiving or that people were receiving. Can you give us some examples of what you've seen now that you've been looking into it? Anything we should be aware of?
Well, I haven't seen specifically many states, except in general, that there might be money tied to DEI programs, that there might be money tied to, other of those kinds of programs, or just not being used to be spent on teaching the children. They're having teacher conferences. They're spending money more on superintendents or administration than they are on the money going to the kids. And I think that's where it's evident.
I remember that we were instructed to teach Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth here in California when I was a fourth grade teacher. And it actually did not dawn on me at that time that it was incredibly politically charged, if you think about it. Al Gore is obviously a politician. His curriculum was obviously political, and it was something that was initiated through the teachers' unions, probably in connection with the Department of Education. And so I think when people don't understand what the harm has been behind the Department of Education and the type of influence that it has had over the past few years on our education system, it's difficult because people are thinking that the public schools are going to get shut down if the Department of Education is going to get shut down. It's an incredible play of fear-mongering. And I'd love for you to just explain to us, what does it actually mean? How much money is going from the Department of Education into the actual schools? And should moms and dads be concerned that they're not going to have an afternoon program for their kids to go to? What are these things going to actually do to the day-to-day American once the Department of Education is not there? Is it true that we'll have no more public schools in America?
Oh, definitely not. In fact, what we have seen in states where there are more and more opportunities for school choice, there's more competition then. We have seen it's like a rising tide lifts all boats. The public schools do better. The charter schools do better. The private schools do better. There should be that choice because that is real diversification when you can do that.
And so would American citizens be able to get, if they choose not to send their kids to a government school, could they get a voucher from the federal government to send their kids to a different school, or does that still go through the state?
That goes through the states. The school choice program is not, the voucher systems are still, state by state. And I think that's one of the things that you're seeing more states as they're passing school choice or educational savings accounts or voucher programs, that parents can take that money and spend it towards moving their child, to a charter school or a private school.
Some of the criticism that I've been reading is that you're moving too fast. How could you chop down almost half of the Department of Education in only a few months? And don't you need to wait a little bit and go into this slower so that there isn't going to be a ripple effect of backlash? What is your response to that?
Well, I can tell you that a lot of the programs that were started were in conjunction with my staff that had gone in ahead of my confirmation, working with the DOGE, parts of Elon Musk's organization, and they were incredibly efficient at identifying a lot of waste that was in the department. A lot of, programs, a huge amount of waste of money that you could cut out right away. And we did know, especially since we were going to downsize first the Department of Education as we continued then to dismantle it. So we did, in what was called a RIF, we fired about half of our workforce. Now, that sounds really harsh, to do that, but there was such an off-ramp for those people, that we fired. First of all, they had, an opportunity to take early retirement. Then they had an opportunity to be put on, administrative leave for a while. There were several programs that they had. And then we offer counseling for them on their resume development, et cetera. So most of them really are still on payroll till September. Now, there were some instances we found we cut a little too deep. So we brought back some people. That happens when you're downsizing or you're restructuring. Even in the private sector, you found, okay, we thought we were just cutting fat. We cut a little muscle here we need to bring back. So we brought back some people.
Are there any examples that you can share with us? Things that you found that you actually did like?
I think in our legal department, we had, we brought back a few of the lawyers, that we had let go. And so, because, the legal world is just so time consuming.
Yes.
So we did bring back some of the lawyers.
Are the superintendents of education grateful to you? Because I would imagine that you're giving them more autonomy to be able to do what they need to do in their states. Are you getting phone calls from them saying, thank you so much for letting me do what it is that I need to do for my state?
Well, right now we're talking about it. if you will. These are programs we want to institute. This is the downsizing and the dismantling of the Department of Education, so they love it. Governors are calling and saying, we can't wait till we really have control. Now, you think about this. The states actually control 90% of their own budget. They fund it themselves. Most of it, a great deal of it is property taxes in states. So the federal government actually supplies about 10% of the education budget for each state. But governors like, Kim Reynolds in Iowa, Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, and Governor Landry in Louisiana, those who have really beefed up their programs and know exactly what they're doing are saying, this is the best thing that could possibly happen to education. And we're ready. We're ready to take on this challenge.
I can't understand why would a governor of a Democrat-run state not be happy with having more autonomy as well. You're mentioning some of the Republican states, but if you're going to these departments of education and governors, and you're saying, I'm going to support you in finding out what is the best way to support your constituency. I'm going to let you do that. And I'm going to remove my strings. I'm going to back off. I'm going to stop with the politicking. And I'm just going to let you handle it and let every state compete to have the best education system in the union. Why would any governor say to you, I don't want that education freedom. I don't want the autonomy to help my citizens? What argument are they making?
Well, they get a lot of pressure from the teachers' unions, who are a little bit afraid of more autonomy in states. And so I think that does come to bear, as well. A lot more of the Republican states are either right-to-work states or have no unions. And the blue states, more of them are unionized. So they do get a lot of pressure from teachers groups who push back against charter schools and more choice in the school system because they're afraid their teachers, aren't going to be there. They're going to lose their power, their control over their teachers. And I think they do wield a lot of power and put a lot of pressure on governors.
Yeah, and one of the things they are also saying is that the special needs kids are not going to get the support. And they're also saying that the Title I kids, the kids who go to schools, inner city schools, are not going to get the support from the federal government. And so that's a lot of the things that I'm hearing in Los Angeles that, low-income kids are not going to get the support they used to get in the past. And that's propagated probably through the unions as well. And so are the governors still going to have support where they could give support to the kids?
Yeah, they will. As a matter of fact, it was important to the president that the funding for Title I funding and also for IDEA, which are the disabled and handicapped children, that was not reduced.
Right.
And so that funding is continuing to go into the states. And I was asked a question about, that our special needs kids aren't going to get the same kind of support. We need someone in Washington really looking over that. And I've said, okay, let me just play this out for you. Now, is a teacher or a paraprofessional in the classroom and a parent who's working with their child knows what needs there are, seeing this child every single day, able to understand better what that child needs and able to ask for it, or me sitting in my office in Washington, D.C.? I said, the answer is really clear. You can't be as impactful from Washington, D.C., all tangled up in the bureaucracy, better than that parent working with the school, developing their own special education plan for that child, making sure, hopefully, that they are going to, have the support that they need. So it's really something to think about, but to understand. Of course, the answer is clear. It's better serviced where the child is.
Do you think the governors and the superintendents of states that lean Democrat would have done the right thing and would have been happy about having more autonomy so that they can serve their constituencies if the teachers' unions, the national teachers' unions, were out of the picture?
Well, it would be hard to say out of the picture, but I certainly think there needs to be some more give and take. And I think there was a time when the teachers' unions served a much bigger role and purpose, to get teachers' pay, up and benefits and that sort of thing. But now when you look at all the dues that are paid by members of the unions and how much of those dues go to political contributions, et cetera, they're not going to teachers. No. They're not raising the pay. So I think I think there's merit in looking at the system and whether there should be no unions for teachers. But I think that's something that would need to be discussed. I'm certain Randy Weingarten wouldn't exactly agree with me on that.
I'm sure she wouldn't agree with either one of us on a lot of things, and probably call us all kinds of names. But I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the universities, and I know that you've issued several letters, and you're right now in conversations with Harvard University. And I looked up their endowment. It's north of $53 billion.
Yes.
So Harvard is probably one of the wealthiest universities in the world. And what I am trying to understand is, why are Americans getting so much grief because we don't want to give these wealthy schools more billions of dollars? I perceive Harvard as a very wealthy school for mostly wealthy people. Over the past 5 years, American taxpayers through the Department of Education have given more than $9 billion to Harvard. Why do hardworking Americans need to give billions of dollars to these elite universities? Why do they even need our money?
Well, that's a question that's being asked, but certainly a lot of that money comes from HHS and from doing research, scientific research, et cetera. So there's a lot of that research, that is really done well and has great benefit for the country. However, your question's correct. If someone is donating $53 billion tax-free to Harvard, why couldn't they donate and fund a lot of this research and these programs that taxpayers are providing a lot of the money for, especially when we are looking now at Harvard and a lot of the things that I've questioned, with them relative to their anti-Semitism, how they're not treating that the way they should on campus. Where are their students coming from? What kind of vetting do they do for students that are coming outside of the United States? Teachers they're bringing in. There's not the diversity of opinion. Now, none of this has to do with First Amendment rights. This is really civil rights issues that we are raising relative to these universities. I think there should be debate on campus. There should be, give and take always. Freedom of speech is one of it's one of our founding principles. And we should not discourage that in any way. But when you suppress one speech for another and you let hate speech get involved, and then you actually have situations on campus where students' safety and well-being are in jeopardy, then that's just totally wrong. And President Trump he campaigned on this issue. So first we were looking at anti-Semitism on different campuses. We looked at Columbia. I've met with the president of Columbia, the first president, the acting president, and then when she stepped down and went back to teaching, I met with the second president. We talked about the things, and we've been having really productive conversations with Columbia about how to move in the right direction, and they understood, especially about that they couldn't allow encampments on campuses and putting students' lives at risk and in danger, and having Jewish students say that they were afraid to go to class, really driving them almost underground. And so you just can't allow that if they're getting federal funds. If they want to operate totally privately without any federal funds, well, then we'd still look to protect, civil rights, and there would be cases that would be brought. But in terms of federal funding for the universities, they've got to step up and do the right thing.
You bring up anti-Semitism, and it's puzzling to try to understand why are they doing this. But I would also say that my experience with religious freedom on campus has been a problem in general. I mean, we know about the high school coach who kneeled to pray, who got in trouble, and he's a Christian coach. And there was an incredible anti-Christian sentiment on many of America's campuses. And they've, it seems to be okay to do that as well, or it seemed to have been okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so to hold these universities accountable, as you say, if they're receiving our funds, questionable whether they even need our funds, but let's say they need our funds, at least holding them accountable. If the Department of Education is no longer there, who will hold these universities accountable if we're giving them funds?
The Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Justice.
Okay.
And they already have a very robust Office of Civil Rights, as does Education, and there could probably be a merger of those two offices of civil rights.
It sounds like there's so much overlap in what the Department of Education has been working on, right?
Exactly.
Every time I ask you about a program, you tell me, well, actually HHS has been handling that. And then I ask you about, civil rights or Title IX, you'll say, oh, well, actually, the Department of Justice has been handling it. Anything that has to do with writing checks, well, the Treasury has been handling it. And so it's just this like weird overlap between what the Department of Education has been doing and what everybody else has been doing, including the state departments of education.
Sure.
So they're just like hovering over a bunch of things and paying 4,400 employees to write checks.
Well, the 4,400 employees didn't write checks. So at the Department of Education, there's a lot of oversight, and the Department of Education acted as a conduit for funds to flow through. And now, as I said, they would flow maybe through another agency or go directly to the states. And so there's not going to be any lost. There'll be more efficiencies gained by the way it would happen.
I just read that China is mandating that students are going to study AI by 4th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think Americans should learn how to work with AI at an early age?
Absolutely. Because the world is going with more advanced technology. And AI, well, it's already in so much of the things that we do that we don't even really realize that it's there. But as industry demands more and more efficiencies with AI, and what's the next thing after AI? Our students have to learn. Just as they first learned to type, and then they went on to use computers, and now there's AI. The industry demands it. And we clearly need to educate them and also to be competitive in the world.
So how do you think we do that? How do we incentivize our educators, our educational institutions, even the free market to enter into a competitive market that is actually raising a cohort of young Americans that can compete on world stage and really just be happy, well-rounded, educated human beings?
Well, it's I think the misperception or misconception, if you will, of what the Department of Education does is that we establish curriculum. We don't. We don't hire teachers. We don't decide what textbooks are used in states. That's all done at the state level. But what we'd like to do is to make sure that we encourage states to look at, as I said, best practices and what tools are available. And just as the private sector now develops textbooks and curriculum and presents it to state boards of education that they get adopted for those states. Well, I think there's more and more from the private sector through, AI technology and development that would come in place. And they're going to be those schools who are going to say, you know what, we're going to adopt this. We're going to try this. And they'll see the results. And once the results are in, then everyone is like, wow, that's best practices. It's like, as you mentioned, Cade Brumley, Louisiana, he got a lot of flack for the things that he was doing. And some of the other states, but all of a sudden it's like, hey, it worked. What are they doing? Let's take a look at that. But I think relative to AI and other technology, it's a demand, that is being made now on graduates that you have to have this knowledge. And so the sooner you're taught it, the sooner you learn, and the more proficient you become at it. And as I mentioned earlier, not only is it a working tool, but it's also a learning tool because AI with one-on-one tutoring can just be amazing. I visited a school, and I was actually at a recent convention, a conference, and they were talking about AI and how students who were being taught through this program could learn more in 2 hours than other students that were in school all day. And so that's an amazing concept, to do that. And they're not becoming computer nerds. They're just having this one-on-one instruction, and it's teaching to the child with the individual ways that child can learn. I think the one thing that I've heard over and over as I've been around the country is that, there is no one-size-fits-all in education. One child can learn, verbally. Another one really has to have sight and put a pen to paper or hands on keys or whatever it is that child needs to learn. And I think that's, again, I'll go back to my theme. I think education is best handled at the states where teachers are involved in that education.
Yeah, open the market and free it up and see some competition coming in.
Absolutely. And teachers then have to perform. I think that, merit-based pay for teachers is absolutely the way it should be. I don't know why it's not the same as it is in the private sector. I hear arguments, pro and con, but, teachers who are incentivized, to do well, their children, their students perform, then you hear, oh, well, they just taught to the test and that's why they did so well. Good teachers. And I think teaching it's one of the most noble professions in our country. That's why I first wanted to be a teacher. And we have such innovative, dedicated teachers who will spend the time. How many times do you hear about teachers going out of their own pocket to buy supplies? Yeah. They shouldn't have to. And, but those teachers are going, above and beyond. They'll call a parent at home. They'll talk to them and say, hey, or is everything okay at home? We've watched, Mary or Johnny not doing so well. I mean, you still have teachers who are doing that. And, but as the pace of learning increases and as more technology is brought into the classroom, those teachers have to be free to utilize that and taught. That's where I think our teacher training money should go, not in DEI programs that they've participated in, but let's train our teachers to be the very best teachers that they can be to their students.
I could totally relate to that because I think that actually training them and giving them access to AI and technology can actually supercharge them. They shouldn't feel insecure that AI is going to replace them. It's not going to take their jobs. They're just going to be even more amazing teachers. When you talk about in my earlier career, I was an educator and I was that teacher that went to the 99-cent store and bought some supplies and prizes, and it all came out of my pocket. And the sad thing is that there is no way to incentivize and reward teachers who are doing amazing things. And that is so incredibly unfair. When people talk about those of us who are advocating for school choice, and I'm unbashful about it, I advocate for school choice because part of that is also that if you are a teacher who is willing to go the extra mile, you can win on your own merit and you can be rewarded for that. And for those of us who are the teachers who worked the extra hours, who did the extra work, we would look at our colleagues, teachers who have been there for a while, who, didn't really care anymore. They got jaded for whatever reason it is. And maybe they got jaded because they were never rewarded, right? Mm-hmm. And we would look at them and it's upsetting. It's upsetting that you enter into the field of education and you are not allowed to win on your own merit. It's not that the harder you work, the luckier you get and the more you can get rewarded. Everybody is flat, no matter how hard you work, you all make the same income. That is so incredibly unfair that the education system in America does not reward amazing teachers.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm you and I are on the same bandwagon about that because teachers who are going that extra mile, you want to incentivize them and say, boy, you're doing a great job. I'm so happy you're here. And you know what? If that teacher is struggling in the school they're in to be rewarded, well, then that teacher has an opportunity to find another place to go to teach, which is, which is harder to do right now.
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, I'd love to hear some good news because we talked about some of the rough things that have happened in the past. But what are some of the exciting things that I know that you've been traveling a lot, you've been going to a lot of conferences, you've been picking up all kinds of new ideas that hopefully Americans can benefit from. Is there anything that you can share with us that you think is super exciting that parents should pay attention to?
It's interesting. We've talked a lot about the new technology, AI, and how incredible all that is. But those schools that are showing a great deal of success and reading scores going up, like Cade Brumley in Louisiana, they have gone back to the science of reading, which is using phonics again, going back, dare I say, all the way back to how I learned to read. And it is successful. and repetition in math. They're learning their times tables. They're saying them over and over and over again. Then you build on that. And so they're seeing that incredible success. And so I just think that's a bright, shining star. Let's combine a little bit of the old, what worked, with the new. Mm-hmm. And so I think some of the challenge is going to be to combine, some of that. But that repetition and that science of reading, the Mississippi Miracle, same way, just going back to that those basics. And so as I've been around to different schools, they're called classical schools.
Yes, classical education's the hottest
classical
thing.
Learning. And I think that's, it's like, I'm just really excited to see that there are, kind of a return to common sense. Yeah. And as I said before earlier in our conversation, I think a lot of these programs were tried with the best of intentions. A lot of money was put in to try to develop, all of the new and greatest kind of learning, but it just was not as effective. And so I think as we're seeing some of this return to the classical, not exclusively, we've got to bring in all of the other things. Well, but being an educator yourself, up through the third grade, you're learning to read. And after that, you're reading to learn. And if you cannot read, you cannot succeed. You cannot go forward. And when we see scores that 70% of eighth graders can't read at grade level and read proficiently. And that actually, when you go into high school, you see that same percentage. And do you know there was a graduate in Hartford, Connecticut? She graduated valedictorian of her class. She sued her school because she couldn't read, but yet she was valedictorian.
It's unbelievable
because that's an incredible thing.
Because they get money for just matriculating the students. They don't care if they're actually learning.
And that's just it's reprehensible. I think that what we have done, I think, to some of our students, and we just. We can't allow that to happen, not in a country like the United States. The president, when he first saw those scores and he saw where we were in comparison to other countries in the world, and we were like 38th out of 40, it was embarrassing.
It's embarrassing.
It was embarrassing. And he was angry. He said, how can this be in this country? And if we want to be, the number one country in the world, and we are in so many ways, but we have to raise this bar. Our children have to be better educated. Clearly, he says, well, what we've been doing has not been working. And we were doing, as well or better before we had the Department of Education. And let's get that money directly to the kids where they need it so that we can have these new programs brought in.
As a business entrepreneur, probably very few people can answer this question as well as you can. I have been wondering, why don't we see more universities open up in America? If you're paying $40,000 to $50,000 a student, that must be a lucrative business for people to want to open up more universities. That's a lot of money, plus everything we discussed about Pell Grants and funding that you can receive from the government. Yet the competition is so difficult to enter. It is very, very difficult for people to open new schools, to open new universities. And why is that? Because ultimately, everything we're talking about, freeing the market, seeing innovation, really comes down to competition. But how do you create competition if you can't establish additional teacher colleges, schools, universities that can compete against the Harvards and the Yales? Why is it? Why are we not seeing more education competition and more universities out there?
Well, I think you are seeing more competition and more universities starting to open, like in Austin. Mm-hmm. However, in order for those graduates to get jobs, the employer is looking for accreditation. Mm-hmm. And so there is like a monopoly on accreditors in the country. So the president certainly has issued an executive order that this is going to change. There should be more competition. I mean, if you think about the fact that there is only one accreditor for all the law schools in the country, the American Bar Association, they dictate then what those schools have to teach. These are the subjects. This is the direction you have to take things in. So there's no competition there. So all of the lawyers, that we're turning out, those universities, if they want to be accredited, then they have to be accredited by the American Bar Association. And so the president has said, no, we need more competition. And it takes a while for an accreditor to become an accreditor. There's some steps and hurdles that you have to go through to do that. So let's streamline those. Let's make them. I mean, you can't just hang your shingle up and say, I'm an accreditor.
Sure.
There should be steps you need to go through. But there should be more competition. And universities in certain areas in the country, they can only use that accreditor that's in that area. So the president's opening it up and he's saying, nope, pick any accreditor you want anywhere in the country, so that you're not bound then by that geographical boundary and what's working or what's been thought of that you have to do, like in the Northeast or the Southeast or whatever. So that's really, I think, going to change and open it up for more competition for universities to open as well.
Wow, that would be amazing, because then we can see more teacher colleges. I mean, you know what they're teaching in the teacher colleges. And the fact that we as Americans are paying to teach teachers how to teach anti-Americanism to our kids and everything that goes with it, to have that kind of, who is holding these accreditors accountable? Is anybody electing them or I mean, they're like the unelected kings of our country.
They're part of the Department of Education, not part of it, but we're overseeing them. So it's another area where we will look at to say, okay, where should this accountability really lie? And so that'll be part of what we'll do as we dismantle the Department of Education.
Well, Madam Secretary, you're doing so many things. You're doing so many things, which is why it's not a surprise that you're being attacked the way you're being attacked, because those who do good things and fight evil will be attacked, probably in the same amount. So you're probably getting the same amount of love as hate, but hopefully you're only seeing the love and only the support is actually making it into your heart. But truly,
I can tell you, we're just trying to keep up with the president. He is just done, full throttle, full time, and there's just so much that he wants to accomplish. He was so pleased with his first 100 days, and I think we were pleased with what we were accomplishing within the first 100 days as well. So it's when you have a leader who is a real driver and has so much that he really does want to accomplish for the country. And yes, I'm part of the administration, but that's not just a political statement. That is real leadership that he's shown.
Well, thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for your humility, that I think you realize that you're going to take a few steps forward and sometimes a couple of steps back.
Sure.
and learn how to do what it is ultimately that you're trying to do, which is to save our kids and extract them from the education bureaucracy that they've been suffering under. And, we're going to keep praying for you, because ultimately your success is the success of our kids.
Thank you.
And so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bless you.